Hello, my name is Alison Schafer. I'm a Technical Officer at the World Health Organization with the Department of Mental Health and Substance Use. It's my pleasure to speak to you about the Interagency Standing Committee's Common Monitoring and Evaluation Framework for Mental Health and Psychosocial Support in Emergencies, version 2.0, published in September 2021. Throughout this module, I will be joined by my colleagues, Sarah Harrison, Ananda Galappatti, and Brandon Gray, who will support me in orienting you to this framework. Today, we will speak about the basics of monitoring and evaluation, or M&E, and the rationale for M&E of MHPSS programming. We'll talk about what the IASC Common M&E Framework is, what it includes and its history, how the framework can be used in implementation, and we will highlight some key tools and resources for MHPSS M&E. Let's start with the basics and remind ourselves what monitoring and evaluation is. Monitoring would be viewed as the continuous and systematic gathering of routine information, assessing progress over time. While evaluation is the assessment of specific information at specific time points to ascertain if the actions taken achieve their intended results. Often, more emphasis is placed on evaluation. However, let's remember that monitoring is just as important, if not more important than evaluation, especially in relation to MHPSS programs. You see, if a program is not being well monitored, there is a risk that unseen harm could be caused by our actions. We must always monitor our MHPSS work well to ensure the right interventions are having their intended impact. And of course, if we are not monitoring the impacts of our work, there is a chance our evaluation may not yield successful results. So monitoring and evaluation always goes hand in hand. Together, monitoring and evaluation represent linked but separate activities that promote better programming. So you might ask, why having a common framework for MHPSS monitoring and evaluation was so especially important? And there are several reasons that are mentioned here. In the previous slide, one of the reasons is that there must be a process to ensure our interventions and actions are not causing harm to the people we aim to serve. The life-saving impact of MHPSS is sometimes less visible, but no less important if we compare it with other essential humanitarian actions. M&E helps to ensure no harm is done and to also determine whether progress is being made. Other rationale for creating the Common M&E Framework included the need for mechanisms to promote accountability and compliance with key standards and stakeholders, including service users. Well-implemented M&E in MHPSS programs provides regular opportunities for communities and service users to provide feedback. And while all of this is generally well accepted, the global MHPSS community noted some years ago that M&E was highly variable. Having a lack of common language about goals, outcomes, indicators and measurement across MHPSS programs or organisations resulted in challenges to globally present the need and benefits of our work, and it affected learnings across organisations. In 2017, the IASC MHPSS Reference Group published its first version of the Common M&E Framework for MHPSS in emergency settings. In this original document, we identified and reached consensus for a common goal for all MHPSS programs, 5 outcomes that the majority of MHPSS programs work towards, and indicators at both goal and outcome levels. However, the identification of means of verification, at least for the goal impact level indicators, was lacking, and this was a much bigger piece of work. So while the first version of the framework was being used, this second version of the framework, which would include means of verification for the goal impact indicators, was being developed. To generate the second version of the M&E framework, we needed to first agree on what we would and would not change. Aside from one indicator about information provision, all other indicators attached to the goal and outcomes remained the same. As well, the ways the concepts about M&E were described also remained the same. Each year, a working group was formed to undertake the practical aspects of work, and their recommendations were put to the wider IASC reference group for consensus building throughout the process. The second version of the Common M&E Framework for MHPSS in emergency settings was officially launched early 2022. This brings us to the framework itself. For this, I will now pass to my colleague, Sarah Harrison, who will take you through the key elements and guidance of the framework.
Thank you, Ali. My name is Sarah Harrison. I work for the IFRC Reference Centre for Psychosocial Support, and I am the head of the technical team, which is a team of MHPSS advisors, which are predominantly based in Copenhagen, and we work to support the 192 Red Cross, Red Crescent national societies that are based around the world. I'm going to talk to you today and give you an overview of the parts of the Common Monitoring and Evaluation Framework that Ali just introduced to you. There are three main elements to do with the MHPSS Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. The first one is the goal, and you can see that the goal is a specific end result, the desired or expected one as a result of the project outcomes being achieved. And in this M&E framework, we have one common goal covering all programs, which I will go through with you in the next slide. And we also have 6 impact level indicators that help us measure whether we are achieving that goal or not. We also have in the framework something called outcomes, and we have 5 outcomes that I will explain with you again in the next slide. And an outcome are the changes that occur as a consequence of your project or your program's specific activities. And again, we have a series of outcome level indicators to help us measure whether we are achieving that or not. And then lastly, we have something called outputs. And outputs are your activities which are aligned with your respective activity plan or your respective project plan. For the purposes of this M&E framework, output level activities are not included in the framework. And that's because they are very specific to individual agencies' activities or project, and it would be too exhaustive and would make the framework too big for us to try and work out how to fit in all the possible activities that come under the outputs in the framework. And the key thing to remember is once these 3 tiers have been or were defined in the development of the framework, we then did a lot of work within the reference group member agencies to work out what would fit under that goal. So what would the goal look like? What would the outcomes look like? And how could we measure them with the corresponding impact level indicators or outcome level indicators? So now I'm going to go through and go into the framework in a bit more detail. So here at the top of the slide, you can see that we have the word goal, and the goal, which is common across all of the programs that we hope all agencies are delivering and the services they're providing in the field, all of them should feed into this goal, and that the goal should cover 2 aspects. One is reduce suffering, which is very much related to humanitarian principles and the humanitarian imperative. And the second aspect is related to improving mental health and psychosocial well-being. So it's that link between reduced suffering, humanitarian imperative, and zooming in on mental health and psychosocial well-being as well. And then, as I said before, there are 6 impact level indicators in relation to that goal to help us measure our ability to achieve it or not across multiple programs and multiple agencies doing programs or providing services. In the next layer, you can see that there are 5 outcome level indicators. And they are arranged in 2 groups. The first group is called the community-focused outcomes, and these are outcomes 1, 2, and 3 that you can see written on the slide here. And then the second level are what we call person-focused outcomes, which are outcomes 4 and 5. And in outcomes that are more community focused, you're looking very much at psychosocial support programs and looking very much at those bottom layers in the IASC intervention pyramid. So very much your family, your community support, your broad programming looking at basic service and security, your broad protection, do no harm approaches. And then your more person-focused ones are targeting people that have additional levels of distress or groups that are particularly at risk. They might be at-risk families or they might be at-risk individuals. And then you have the more focused care or more focused services being provided. And then underlying all of those outcomes in the entire framework, so both the goal level and at the outcome level, we have the core principles. And these are the core principles that are written in the IASC guidelines in the introductory section. So before the action sheets start. And these core principles are human rights and equity. They are participation of affected populations or participation of beneficiaries to be included in monitoring and evaluation. It's sort of looking at do no harm. It's looking at the integrated services and supports, and it's looking at building upon available resources within communities and families, and they're looking at their capacities. And then lastly, it's the reinforcing the message about multi-layered support systems. So very much working across that spectrum of the intervention pyramid that's also included in the guidelines. And you can see those core principles are written underneath at the bottom of the table. And this table is also on the back page of the IASC Common Monitoring and Evaluation Framework if you choose to have a printed or a PDF copy. Now, lastly, I'm going to speak to you about the impact level indicators. So remember, these impact level indicators are measuring the goal, and the goal is unified across all of the programs. It's looking at reduced suffering and improved mental health and psychosocial well-being. Now, in order to measure that goal, we have these 6 impact level indicators that were created by consensus and done creatively with IASC reference group member agencies through the series of workshops over the years that this was under development. And you can see that there are some that are focusing more individual level, so looking at issues to do with functioning of a person, subjective well-being, looking at disabling distress or the presence of mental, neurological or substance use disorders or conditions. You're looking at people's ability to cope, whether that's a family or an individual person's ability to cope with their own problems and manage themselves. And then we have a lot of social impact level indicators looking at social behavior and social connectedness. And I will leave that on screen for a few moments so you can actually read each of the indicators in detail to familiarize yourself with them. Now, the challenge with these impact level indicators, as you may have realized as you were reading them, is that they're quite difficult to measure, particularly if we want to have culturally and contextually appropriate tools in which to measure them. So the Common M&E Framework also includes the means of verification, which are the means by which we measure the indicators to see if we're making progress against our goal. And we have 21 qualitative means of verification to help us measure the 6 impact level indicators. And within the framework, we also have 25 suggested quantitative means of verification as well. And my wonderful colleague Ananda Galappatti from mhpss.net will introduce in more detail to you the quantitative and the qualitative means of verification to help us measure those 6 impact level indicators. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and hi, everyone. My name is Ananda Galappatti, and I'm the Director of Strategy at the global online platform mhpss.net, and also a practitioner based in Sri Lanka. I'd like to discuss with you the quantitative and qualitative means of verification, or MOVs, that are included in the Common Framework. Across the top of the table, you will see 6 impact indicators. Qualitative and quantitative MOVs are divided across the age ranges in the left column, that is 0 to 5 years, 6 to 11 years, 12 to 17 years, and for 18 years and above. What you see is not a comprehensive list of the means of verification contained in the document, but is rather an example of how the means of verification across impact indicators and age ranges may be structured. In reality, a particular MHPSS program may only target a few impact indicators and a few age ranges of service users. One of the most common questions we are asked about the means of verification selected and recommended in the Common M&E Framework for MHPSS is what the evidence or criteria has been for their inclusion. The process of this second revision of the M&E Framework took longer than the first, about 3.5 years in total. Evidence-based inclusion criteria were established for the prospective means of verification to be included for each age range and goal impact indicator. The working groups reviewed the relevant literature and met to reach agreement on the most appropriate measurement tools to include, or in the case of some qualitative approaches, which would be the most appropriate strategies. Recommendations from the working group were taken to the wider reference group for validation. Eventually, the final framework, including the means of verification, were reviewed multiple times and eventually approved by the IASC MHPSS Reference Group and the Operational Policy and Advocacy Group, OPAG, as well as by the IASC Secretariat. Although the process was arduous, the framework now available represents the recommendations of a wide array of global experts. Linked to the means of verification tables, a separate annex for each individual assessment method is provided. These one-page annexes about each MOV outline details like the number of assessment items, type of items, scoring method, available languages, copyright information, and other considerations when selecting or using measurement tools or approaches. Further, a repository of the resources from this guidance has been made available on mhpss.net, and I encourage everyone to check this out before making final decisions about your M&E plan for your MHPSS program. Using this toolkit will allow you to review the tools or approaches that you are considering using, giving you an opportunity to also see if there might be additional or updated information about the means of verification you are considering. I'll now hand over to Brandon to finish off our orientation.
Thanks, Ananda. So my name is Brandon Gray, and I'm a technical officer in the Department of Mental Health and Substance Use at the World Health Organization. For this part, I will cover some additional guidance in the framework, including practical steps to apply it in practice, as well as some additional resources and supports that are available in using the framework. In addition to those core elements then of the framework that we've discussed so far, for example, the overall goal, the outcomes, the indicators, and the means of verification, the current version of the framework also includes additional guidance on many key topics, such as suggested approaches and considerations you'd like to make when selecting a means of verification or adapting a means of verification, or even creating a new means of verification if you're so inclined. Information also and guidance on plans and procedures for ethical data collection. As mentioned, there are also these annexes on each of the means of verification, both the qualitative and the quantitative, what to do and how to adapt the framework and assessment measures to suit contextual needs, and even a few examples that show how a programmer might include the goal, the outcomes, the indicators, and the means of verification from the framework across different types of MHPSS programs, but based on some real case studies. And finally, the framework also describes some of the gaps that were identified throughout the process of selecting the means of verification to include. So let's spend a little time now discussing how the M&E framework can be used and implemented in reality. So the framework outlines 6 key steps for monitoring and evaluation that can be used as a process to implement the M&E framework. So the first step is that MHPSS programs should always be designed and based on the needs of people affected by the crisis and the key issues that they've identified to be addressed based on an MHPSS needs assessment. So the framework itself doesn't describe how to conduct an MHPSS needs assessment, but the IASC Reference Group for Mental Health and Psychosocial Support has published additional guidance to support that process. So that's step 1. Then in step 2, based on the needs assessment, the framework can be used to design a logical framework or log frame using the goal, outcome, and indicators to plan what kind of program one might want to design and implement to address the needs identified in the needs assessment. So the framework suggests at a minimum that programs integrate at least the overall goal and one goal impact indicator from the framework, plus one of the recommended means of verification related to that goal impact indicator, plus at least one outcome and corresponding outcome indicator from the framework. Now, of course, a program could use more of these outcomes, indicators, and means of verification based on what their overall goal is and what they're trying to do. But it is recommended that when using the framework, MHPSS programs use at a minimum those selected elements. Then in the third step, the framework can support in selecting the means of verification that are relevant to the goal and the outcomes you've selected. So you want to consider things like whether the MOV needs to be adapted, if it can be used, and how it can be scored. And all of those things are discussed within the framework. Then in step 4, after you've designed this basic M&E log frame, you can rely on the framework to support in planning how monitoring and evaluation data will actually be collected. So the framework provides guidance on critical topics like obtaining informed consent, data storage and protection, confidentiality, sampling methods, training for data collectors and their safety, and many other key topics that are part of data collection. Then in step 5, after data has been collected, the framework provides guidance on how you might analyze and report that data, which is of course crucial for learning from the M&E process. And then in step 6, the framework describes how you can share results with key partners, donors, and others. So related to this step, the framework also emphasizes the importance of sharing results with the community who's been affected and participated in that M&E process. And also, of course, how to take the learning from the M&E process to build upon and improve programming for greater impact in the future. So that summarizes the core guidance of the IASC Common M&E Framework for MHPSS, but I'd like to also describe some additional support that is available. And that's because sometimes monitoring and evaluation can feel a bit overwhelming, particularly when one's undertaking M&E for the first time, or when they're undertaking M&E with a new type of program that's being implemented. So to support the uptake and the implementation of monitoring and evaluation for MHPSS and this IASC Common M&E Framework tool, the Interagency Standing Committee Reference Group for Mental Health and Psychosocial Support has established an M&E Helpdesk. So if you'd like some support in using the framework in your own work, please do contact this helpdesk by email or via the contact form you see displayed here on the screen. And the goal of this helpdesk is simply to provide timely and practical support to all MHPSS programs in establishing and implementing M&E plans using the IASC Common M&E Framework. So do reach out if you think this could be useful in your work. Also, in addition to this video, there are a number of practical demonstration videos that were done by experts who describe how they've used the framework in the field on their own programming. And these videos were produced as part of the launch of this tool and can be accessed on the playlist linked on the video description of this video. So please do visit these if some further demonstration of the framework. So that concludes our orientation to the IASC Common M&E Framework for MHPSS. For any additional information, please do download the framework document by visiting the IASC website at the link that's also in this video's description. And remember, you can contact the M&E Helpdesk if you'd like additional support. Thanks very much, and best wishes moving forward with monitoring and evaluation of your MHPSS programming. Thank you.